So let me be sure that I understand our Secretary of State correctly. We have $20 million ready to send to random guy named Juan in Venezuela for regime change effort. I'm sorry, for humanitarian aid. While 800,000 American workers are either being forced to work without pay by our government or have to stand in line at soup kitchens or food banks to eat. Is that what I'm hearing? That we have all of this money, all of this extra wealth laying around to send to some guy no one's ever heard of so that he can pretend to be president of a country that's had, I think, 20 elections in the last 25 years? I mean, anyone who sits and names themselves leader and inaugurates themselves, I think that's pretty much the definition of a dictator, which is what happened the last time the U.S. tried to instigate a coup in Venezuela. A man named Pedro Carmonas, as soon as the U.S. installed him and deposed Hugo Chavez for about 36 hours, he immediately subverted the Constitution. I wonder if that's Juan's plan now. There's these memes out there talking about how evil, terrible, horrible socialism is going to lead to starvation and all the problems in Venezuela. They're counting on the United States, the people of the United States, not understanding what really happened in 2014 and 2015. Now, I've used this chart before, but we always have new people, and information is going to be key in this so that people know how to talk about this. And they can explain that in 1998, 1999, when Chavez took power, they were coming out of a huge recession. They were coming out of a major financial problem. As you can see over here, the purple, the yellow, and the orange lines represent three pro-U.S. leaders of Venezuela, starting back in 86 through 99. Some of the highest levels of inflation in the last 50 years. And all sorts of economic turmoil. When Chavez took over in 98 and 99, oil revenue went up, and inflation, the red line, stayed steady. You didn't hear about stories of shortages out of Venezuela in 2008 or 9. You didn't hear about any problems back then. All of the memes, all of the reports of the problems in Venezuela happened in 2014 and 2015. Now, why did the price of oil drop precipitously in those 3 years? And why did inflation skyrocket? Well, that's very simple. The U.S. lifted its ban on crude oil exports that exact same year and glutted the market unexpectedly with oil. And it caused problems in more countries than just Venezuela. In fact, we have this here from worldstopexports.com. Now, this is just straight facts. This is an opinion. These are imports into China over that same time, but exports. I've covered this before and I'll cover it again. Here are your top 15 oil exporters during that era. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, Canada, UAE, Iran. Venezuela was number 12. Now, during this time, 13 of the 15 top exporters of oil lost major amounts of revenue. Only 2 of these countries increased the dollar value of their exports of oil during that time, the United States and Iraq. The U.S. increased its value of its exports 328%, and Iraq 0.6. Everyone else was in double-digit losses. 69.2% for Venezuela, 55.5% for Nigeria. I've used that as an example before, the Nigerian example. The leader of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, during that time, had to go to 60 different countries to secure enough loans to make up for the shortfall in revenue that I was showing you here. This green line in the back and these numbers on the side. The revenue from oil in 2013 in Venezuela was almost 60 billion. In 1 year to the next year, it dropped to less than 30 billion, and the year after that, less than 10. Now, they weren't exporting less oil at that time. That wasn't a drop in the production. That was a drop in the amount of money they were being reimbursed for that production. Anybody who's run a business knows what I'm talking about. If all of your costs stay the same of doing whatever it is you do, but the amount of money you bring in drops from, well, in this case, we're saying 60 to less than 10, you're going to go bankrupt. The difference for Venezuela, as opposed to the rest of the world at that time that was suffering under this, all of these countries, Saudi Arabia down 53%, Kazakhstan down 53%, Mexico down 52%. The difference was that the U.S. had declared Venezuela an extraordinary threat, sanctioned them, and prevented them from getting loans to make up the shortfall. That is the difference. So when this happened in Venezuela, that's when all of the starvation started. That's when all of the food shortages happened. But nobody tells you this story. They just want to blame it on socialism in general and just say, well, that's just the way it is in socialist countries. Even though there's all sorts of socialist countries in Europe that aren't starving. China isn't starving. Russia isn't starving. And for 13 years of Hugo Chavez from 1999 to 2012 and 13, never heard about it down there. They were doing much better than Colombia was. In fact, refugees from the Colombian Civil War were going to Venezuela for that very reason. Low-cost medical care, nearly free food, free fuel, free housing. 6 million internally displaced Colombians entered Venezuela during this time. The biggest number I've heard about Venezuela leaving was 3 million. But nobody, of course, talks about that with Colombia because that's the psyop. Colombia is supposed to be the good guys, when really they're the source of literally everything that's fallen apart. One thing I wanted to share with you today is this letter of, well, I don't know what you'd call it, really. It's a letter from Juan, random guy named Juan, asking for help from the United States government. The United States government that can't even pay its own employees. That can't even pass a budget, but require workers to work without pay and eat from food banks. But they provide them letters to forward to their creditors saying, oh, please forgive my debt. But I'll read this for you real quick in case it's too small for the screen. The translation here is rough. I really think they could have done a better job, but it says, Your Excellency, Mr. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, through the communication, I am writing to you in my position as President in charge of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. I'm surprised he still uses the word Bolivarian, because that was put in by Chavez. For the purpose of formally requesting you in your capacity as Secretary of State on behalf of the United States of America and the government of the syntax on this is all wrong. There's literally no verb in this sentence. Basically asking for the shipment with urgent character of humanitarian aid, food, medicine, medical supplies, and perhaps even the sending of a hospital ship that allows to undertake measures that help alleviate the complex humanitarian emergency, to continue with the establishment of coordinated actions with states and international organizations that allow within the framework of the recognition of the transitional government that I preside over, I guess, to articulate with urgency, character, humanitarian aid, And here's the best part: non-reimbursable international financial cooperation, all with the purpose of meeting the most felt needs of our citizens. Random guy named Juan. So I wonder what his plan is going forward. I mean, seriously, when the military has already said, we're not recognizing this guy, and the Chinese has said, we're not going to recognize this guy, and the Russians have said, we're not going to recognize this guy either. And I don't know how they would recognize him, because they have billions of dollars in oil deals tied up with the actual administration of Venezuela. You mark my words, this is going to cause a shooting war. Something's going to fall apart. And when the leader, the elected leader, asks U.S. diplomats to leave, and they refuse to leave, that makes them trespassers, regardless of who the U.S. has decided they are going to recognize. I tried to warn about this a long time ago. I really did. I tried to say this is going to be a problem. Because there's people out there that have, and people, countries, I mean, vested interest in everything staying copacetic in Venezuela. China being premier among them, and India. And there's no way they're just going to let the U.S. install somebody who may or may not honor the deals that they have signed with the current government, the actual government. And when it comes down to this kind of money, you bet people will put troops in. Regardless of whether the United States agrees with the leadership in Venezuela, likes the government, doesn't like the government, we aren't financing our own government. There should be absolutely no way we are sending one red cent to a random guy named Juan for his regime change effort. I'm sorry, for his humanitarian aid needs. And they are pushing the limits of the administration down there. If this happened in this country, this guy, random guy named Juan, would have already been under arrest. And you know it as well as I do. Regardless of the opinions of any outside country of our elections, you don't just get to go stand up and say, I'm president of the United States now because I don't like Mr. Trump or I don't like whoever would be in charge, and then start negotiating with foreign governments for money. That's a crime. That's a crime in any country under any international law or our laws. I really don't know what the end game is here, but to be truthful, on those who are trying to back this guy, if they want a shooting war down there, they're going to get one. But I don't think the American people really understand what that means either, having a major shooting war this close to the Panama Canal. That canal is a stack, it's a house of cards. It would not take very much to shut it down. And that canal gets shut down. Guys, the amount of damage to our economy might be irreparable. But we'll leave it there. We will try to keep up on this as much as we can, but things are changing by the minute. Like, share, subscribe.